Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I'm finishing up with Life Church's video explaining their stance with regards to adult content. So let's go!
David wasn't where he was supposed to be. So he saw something he wasn't supposed to see. Then he did something he wasn't supposed to do.
Which he only had the power to do because God gave it to him, and because God never bothered to tell the Israelites that women should be treated as equals, not as property. You can't steal someone else's wife if that someone else doesn't own his wife.
And that cost so many people who ended up losing so many things that they weren't supposed to lose.
So David would have been able to keep the first child he had with Bathsheba, if only he hadn't slept with Bathsheba? And yeah, Uriah the Hittite died when David sent him to the front line, so he lost his life. But it seems like God could have prevented that by preventing the conception of David's child if he wanted to keep Uriah alive. How much of the responsibility for this should God accept? He is not an innocent party here. According to the Bible, God had an active hand in making the baby that would cause Uriah's death, and then that baby was just slated to die anyway, so the whole thing seems rather pointless.
And it all started when he wasn't where he was supposed to be.
I mean, sure, you could argue that he should have been off committing genocides and enslaving people, but at the end of the day, he was on his own roof.
I'm going to tell you what's very likely some version of your story. There was a time at some point that you were very likely exposed to something sexually impure. It might have been pornography, like me in the 5th grade. It might have been worse than pornography when someone that you loved and trusted took advantage of you and molested you, betraying your innocence. It might have been that you were on a date with somebody and it went from a little kissy, 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 blah, 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 to suddenly clothes were coming off, and the next thing you know, you ended up doing something that you weren't planning on doing.
Did you hear that? This guy is equating heavy petting, looking at porn, and being molested. That is just plain gross. Having a sexual experience as a teenager is normal and can be done in a healthy way, but to take experiences that almost every teenager has and to say that they damage you in the same way that actually being abused would do is itself incredibly damaging.
What you didn't realize at that moment is you actually were wounded.
No, you weren't. Being abused is the only thing on that list that should be considered as having damaging effects, and those who experience such abuse should be taken to real counselors and therapists to help heal their wounds. They shouldn't have to sit there and hear people like you minimizing their experiences by saying they have the same consequences as accidentally seeing a boob once.
You were hurt, you were injured, you were emotionally wounded, you were mentally wounded, you were spiritually wounded.
You know, probably the worst part about all this is that the viewing of porn and having consensual sexual experiences are both choices. Being abused is not. But by equating the three, you are heavily implying that being abused is the victim's fault, and that they should feel the same guilt and shame as someone who looks at porn but thinks it's wrong to do so. And that is just gross.
It's a little bit like a computer virus. If a computer gets a virus, that virus then infects the rest of the computer. What happens is now that you had this wound, you didn't look at the gift of sex that God created in his holiness and beauty for marriage the same way, because now you were injured.
If you were abused, you are now broken and incapable of having sex as God intended it. That's the message that you are sending here. Is that what you want to be saying? I really hope not. But that is what you are saying. Maybe consider your words a bit more carefully in the future.
And your thought life is slightly corrupted. You lost a little bit of your innocence. And there's a war going on. Because there's a part of you that likes the thrill of the sexual, whatever it is, the porn, the masturbation, the fooling around, whatever it is, because there is a buzz and there's a thrill and there's this feel good and there's this dopamine release.
Fuck, man, what the fuck is wrong with you? You knew that this is where you would be going with that. You are literally saying now that the victims of abuse must have liked it. Do you not understand how harmful that message is? Do you think that if there are abuse victims in your audience that they would have just heard this as though you were exclusively talking about the other two categories that you lumped in with abuse, but not about them? This video was gross enough when you were only talking about stigmatizing porn use, but it is taking a very dark turn.
And then it's often followed by this shame and this guilt and maybe even this self-disgust.
Yeah, and do you think that what you're saying now is going to help alleviate that? I think it would actually have the effect of exacerbating it. That's probably your point, actually. I wouldn't have a problem with destigmatizing porn use and seeing everyone sexually happy and healthy. In fact, if it gets destigmatized, then that will make it easier for people who legitimately have addiction problems to seek help. Proper sex education is also pretty important here, which is something that religious organizations usually oppose. It makes no sense. Look at your own damn statistics. 97% of boys will see porn before they turn 21. That's basically all of them. If you raise them to think that any enjoyment they get from such activity is evil and must be purged, then you are fostering an unhealthy sense of guilt and shame. But if you recognize that, yes, they will see porn, and yes, they will most likely enjoy it, and you just have to come to terms with that fact, like it or not, then you can have more productive conversations about health and safety. It will happen, so equip them with the knowledge they need to deal with it in a healthy way, rather than trying as hard as you can to keep them entirely in the dark and teaching them to feel shame when they are inevitably exposed to it anyway.
And then you got married, and your problem didn't go away. Because you thought you were dealing with a lust issue. But it wasn't just a lust issue. You were dealing with a wound.
No, it's pretty much just lust. People crave variety in pretty much anything, and sex with the same person, no matter how emotionally connected you may be, can get repetitive. Porn is a way to introduce variety, and personally, I think it's better if enjoyed together. But sometimes one partner might have some interests that are not mutual. Porn is a way to fulfill some of those interests without trying to convince your partner into doing something they might not want to do. And sometimes it can be a way of discovering interests that you didn't even know that you had. And again, this is where education is key, because porn doesn't depict things realistically, so if you see something there and then copy it without learning how to do it safely, that can have negative consequences, so best to avoid that.
It's hard to describe, but when I was 27 years of age or so, right before starting the church, I really wanted to be clean from this type of temptation. And I prayed, God in heaven, do a miracle. I pray I would never, ever have a lustful thought again. And as hard as it is to describe, at the age of 27, God cleansed my mind, and to this day, I have never had a single impure thought.
So if you are still struggling with it, you must not be believing hard enough. There's a problem with you, not with our ridiculous standards or our conclusions that are completely not based in anything scientific. The problem is with you. You are broken, and God didn't fix you because it's you who didn't believe hard enough. What a piece of work. And that's setting aside the fact that I don't believe for a second that this guy has never had any lustful thoughts for the past 25 years. Unless he's asexual, in which case, I don't believe for a second that he ever struggled with lustful thoughts in the first place.
I just made that up. That didn't happen. Like, oh, really, Pastor? Can we believe you? Like, no, that was a joke. Okay.
Okay, but why would that even be a joke? Is purifying your thoughts something that God is incapable of doing? You do realize that admitting that to be a joke is now also an admission that you are guilty of a sin which gives your wife grounds for divorce, right? Adultery is adultery, even if it's only thought adultery. In fact, maybe this is why churches generally don't preach against divorce as often as they preach against other topics, because they realize that with Jesus' whole thought crime version of adultery, that gives everyone who is not married to an asexual person legitimate biblical grounds for divorce. Maybe that's why the divorce rate is higher among evangelicals.
That you are only as strong as you are honest. You're only as strong as you are honest. You have to be honest.
Yeah, honesty is key. Now, do you think a partner is more or less likely to be honest with you if they know that you consider looking at porn to be just as bad as stealing another man's wife and murdering her husband? It seems like destigmatization would lead to more honesty than promoting guilt and shame.
And so I'm going to put some safeguards in my life as a part of my battle plan so I will not be as vulnerable to the attacks of the enemy. So some things I do, this is just common sense, to honor my bride, Amy, and to honor my God and my pastoral calling. I'm not going to be alone with women in any context.
Well, that's highly impractical. I work at a restaurant. Sometimes female diners come in alone. Am I supposed to refuse service to them? Sometimes the opportunity to eat your staff meal comes at the same time as one of the female employees. Am I to skip my meal to avoid eating with her? Forget the restaurant, my family doctor is female. There exists the real possibility that not only will I have to be alone in a room with her at some point, I mean, this has happened at least once this year that I can think of off the top of my head, but it is entirely possible that at some point in my life, she will have me alone in a room with her hand on my balls. She's a good doctor. I'm not switching doctors because of some gender discrimination shit. And I can assure you that when that scenario plays out, sex won't be anywhere close to the forefront of my mind. Oh yeah, and the result of the appointment that had me alone with my female doctor this year, I was scheduled for an ultrasound for my shoulder, which resulted in me being alone in a room with a female ultrasound technician, while topless. Is that an acceptable context, or would you have been the jerk at the hospital insisting on a different technician and making a scene? Like, I don't try not to watch porn. And I don't have a problem with thinking lustful thoughts when I'm being medically examined. Maybe this isn't a problem with porn, it's a problem with how you view women. You should be able to associate with women without seeing them as sex objects.
For me, I know that I could be potentially vulnerable to look at things online that I shouldn't look at. So I've got my iPad, I've got a mobile device, and I've got my computer, and I call them locked down. I have made it so that I can't access something that I shouldn't look at. So on my mobile device and my iPad, I can't download apps. I just can't. Someone else has to put in a code, so I can't download an app where I might look at something that's inappropriate. My social media, there's like 5 or 6 people that have the codes to my passwords. All my passwords, I've got adult content blocked, so I can't erase anything. And if I try to book a massage, it won't let me even do that. I can't do lots of things. Can't even order a swimsuit and stuff like that. But anyway, there's ways around to someone else can order my swimsuit.
A grown-ass man who has to have stricter parental controls on his device than I have on my 11-year-old's device. Imagine being that insecure.
My computer, everything is tracked. So what I've done is I put up safeguards, and you're like, Pastor Craig, are you like that weak and that vulnerable? And the answer is no. Not normally. Not most of the time.
So, instead of accepting that porn use can be healthy and normal, and being open and honest about that sort of thing with your wife, you instead choose to lock everything down so you can't even enjoy some basic functionality of your devices. And according to your statements here, it's not even a big problem. You don't normally need those safeguards, so you are obviously not addicted. So why subject yourself to those safeguards in the first place? I'll tell you why. It's because God needs control of your sex life for some reason. He's not happy with you being happy, healthy, and fulfilled. He wants you to be shamed into behaving in the way that he has decided you should behave. And what are the reasons he wants you to behave that way? How dare you even question it? It's the will of God. Just do it.
Why in the world would I resist a temptation in the future that I have the power to eliminate today?
Yeah. Why battle the temptation? Personally, I'd rather just give in. With something like porn, giving in doesn't do anyone any harm and can be beneficial. So why battle the temptation at all, even when it does show up?
It starts with the eyes. Jesus said this, sounds crazy, but he said if you look lustfully at a person, you've already committed adultery in your heart. He said if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out.
So, was he being hyperbolic? Because I've never met a Christian who actually gouged out one or both of their eyes, and yet many will often proudly proclaim, as you are doing here, that they have a problem with pornography. So, no need for all the security features on your device, just gouge out your eyeballs, like Jesus said. But then what happens when you are blind but still think lustful thoughts? Blind people have libidos too, you know. Do you gouge out your brain at that point?
And it robs you of what you really, really want, which is intimacy, not just sexually, but relationally.
It is entirely possible to use porn to increase intimacy in a relationship. Now, sure, there are some potential negative side effects from porn use, but those aren't inherent to the porn itself. It's in how the people respond to it. It is possible to have healthy porn habits and unhealthy ones. But as I pointed out earlier, if you stigmatize porn use the way you are doing, it will stop people who actually need professional help from seeking that help. That's it for this one. The rest of his video is when they start playing the emotional music and he starts softening his voice and imploring you not to have the sexual habits that he doesn't agree with. Yeah, all that talk about porn got me excited, so I'm going to take care of a few things now. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Johnny Blade, who says, "Only a Sith deals in absolutes." Yeah, do you know how mad I was at myself that I didn't include a reference to that in my video? I literally edited it, rendered it, uploaded it, designed the thumbnails, typed out the description, scheduled it, re-edited it for podcasting, exported and uploaded the podcast, scheduled the podcast, and then realized that in a video on absolute morality, I didn't once bring up the fact that only a Sith deals in absolutes. I was so damn mad, but not mad enough to go through the editing process again. Thanks for watching. Special thanks as always to my patrons, Lynn Dobbs, Mark McManus, What Jesus, and all the rest, who are the naked people who star in the porn that is my channel. If you'd like to be responsible for thousands of viewers committing adultery, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino. If you feel so inclined, you can also support the channel through direct donation or my Amazon wishlist, which are linked in the description, as well as my social media accounts and my P.O. Box address, and a link to the podcast, which I just mentioned because this is now a podcast thing too. See you next time!